In March of 1944, the flying bombs were still under the command of the fighter staff. Wachtel and his men, still wearing the Tod organization uniforms in order to camouflage their true identity and their mission, had by now built up a huge rear assembly area of the flying bombs, and if all went according to plan, they only needed some 10 days to bring forward the mobile ramps to the pre-prepared positions. So, when on June 4th, 1944, when the Corps directed Wachtel to open fire on June 10th, and he clarified to them it was not possible until the 20th, it did cause some consternation. The chaotic supply system also was not helped by the Allied bombing of all transport infrastructure, and on June 6th, when Wachtel was notified that the invasion had begun, this did further not help matters. But his response was, true to being a soldier, our coast and sights are clear, and with this the decisive phase of the flying bomb was to begin. The High Command and Hitler's anticipation of mass attacks on London spurred Wachtel and his men to try for June 12th. But the logistical situation was a nightmare. Many of the parts had been delivered to the wrong places or were delayed entirely. In 6 places the catapults had been installed, but yet not tested. By 4 o'clock, only 10 flying bombs had been launched from 55 sites, and the effort was halted and the order given to camouflage the sites. But 8 of the bombs made it to England. One exploded 20 minutes from Tower Bridge. Another took down a rail bridge. This meek response from the Germans, however, gave those in London, such as Lord Chervil, the confirmation he needed that the German threat was just negligible. However, Dr. R.V. Jones, in charge, urged the public statement to be made, believing this was simply a premature misfire with much more to come. He was overruled. In fact, the chiefs of staff now released the 3,000 flying fortresses that had previously been tasked to bombing the V sites, now assigned to other duties. The infighting amongst the British as to the real threat was still affecting action and clear view of what was to come. And Wachtel had not been resting, and by the 15th he was operational, and on a grey, rainy day, Wachtel hit London with 194 flying bombs out of the 244 launched. By June 18th, 500 flying bombs had been launched, and so it went on. Many of the V-1s were loaded with a trivalent warhead with twice the explosive power of the RDX type, which is also heavier. This gave them an explosive power comparable to the blockbuster bomb. Today we're going to visit some of the V-1 launch sites around Calais in France. I'm going to go over what the sites were, what's left of them today, and talk about the history of the weapon and its development. Some of the German special weapons programs we know part of. One was the rocket program, both the V-1 and the V-2, even to some degree the V-3, the London gun, that was later replicated by Saddam Hussein, the new U-boats, and of course the jet fighters. Throughout France, you can still see enormous structures constructed for the special projects. Some of the largest bunkers ever built had relation to the rocket program. But looking into them closer, they may not have been just for the rockets that we know of, or for conventional payloads either. Also, many hundreds of smaller sites are strewn around the coast, still surrounded by bomb craters, for the underrated V-1, which, when comparing cost to effect, was actually more effective than the larger V-2. The first indication the British had was in 1939, September 19th, when Hitler in his speech mentioned that a weapon, of which nothing is yet known, and which we ourselves cannot be attacked, end quote. Chamberlain took notice. He directed British intelligence to investigate the nature of this threat. Now, it was not exactly the correct translation, however, it was quite a lot broader than just that. But it got the ball rolling for the British, and a Dr. Jones was put in charge of the investigation. Yes, not kidding, Dr. Jones. In his first 1939 report, he noted that there are numerous weapons Hitler could have alluded to, such as bacterial warfare, new gases, flame weapons, atomic, glide bombs, aerial torpedoes, pilotless aircrafts, including long-range guns, rockets, mines, submarines, death rays, including energy-stopping rays and magnetic mines. Why limit yourself, of course? Already 1934 had the British received over 20 reports on German special weapons, mostly, however, on new combat gases, and actually only one of the reports had named rockets. But we know from the Americans they were very concerned about the German nuclear program. We need to make a note that many of these special programs, however, were both white and black ones, were begun long before Hitler came to power, funded many times by international businesses and banks. This is what remains of the fuel and chemical store warehouse. There's a lot of very interesting chemicals that were needed. That was a lot of interesting chemicals that was needed in order to launch a B-1. And they all had to be kept separately. They all had to be kept away from any kind of a spark source because they were very volatile. So the floor had to be spark-proof, fire-proof. They had to be kept separated and no direct sunlight either. One of those special preparations for these is very interesting. Interesting is the way this ceiling is actually built at an angle. Looks like a regular angled roof, to be honest. Looks in remarkably good shape. Bricks look in good shape. The door arch support looks in good shape. And a huge platform out here for deliveries. And you see the next building down there. This was a rather large. This is the montage building. This is where the rockets would initially arrive and have their transport safeties removed, put on trolleys, of course, and then moved on into the next storage facility. These are very rudimentary offices. Storage buildings, and there's only a couple of guys that was working with this part of the process. First, the rockets would have to arrive, mostly arrive by rail and then by truck, and then they would end up here at the launch sites, where they would then begin various stages of preparation. The V1s would arrive here without wings and without their main warhead. That would all be assembled in place. And here is the water reservoir. Again, you need a lot of water, both to clean out the catapult
And also, of course, well, in case things catch fire. And I'm not talking about fire from above, but you really don't want a forest fire interrupting your launch site. That ramp is really interesting. I've never seen a ramp leading into a basic water reservoir before, because these water reservoirs are very standard for these facilities. You see these everywhere, from the concentration camps to Wolfslayer. Every facility would have a water reservoir like this. The loading platform. This facility is a lot larger than what I've seen before. These rounds I am not familiar with. They cannot possibly have been from bombs. I'm not entirely sure what these were. What is so interesting is this simplicity of the infrastructure for these rockets. There was built so many of them, which was, of course, the better way of doing it. Lots of small mobile ramps, small facilities like this, cheaply constructed, run and operated by fairly small amounts of people. Much better than the big blockhouse type idea, or the huge CNK bunkers, because they would just be bombed as they were. I can't help but to think that these were from ordnance dropped, and somebody were a little clever by lining them with bricks at some point. I have to do a little investigation on that. I don't see any reason why these would be there. I don't see a lot of, not yet anyway, deep craters surrounding this place, because not all of the sites were bombed, of course. They weren't all found. So this would be the next stage building, where the V1s would then be transported into. And if I'm lucky, this is one of those J-shaped buildings that I always wanted to go for a walk through. See, the roof is not particularly thick, nor are the walls. This is how far this building is. This is not one of the big U buildings. This is just a fairly small temporary building, I think. There's a wall here. Red brick here, yes. This is where it ends. We'll see how the built by stone bricks and squared away with a stretched cement roof. It's only about 20-30 meters long. Would only hold a couple of rockets in here, 3 maybe. So this is not the big one. Mounting wood in the ceilings for lighting or what have you. This is the delivery building. Again, I don't see any damage to it. It's a very small building. I've seen those before. Usually they have been remodeled for bat sanctuaries. And the paths are still here between the buildings, so you could roll the V1s and logistical support. The roads are holding up just as nicely now as they did back then. And it's interesting when if you go to Denmark and you find some of these old, we'll always refer to them as German roads, because they built them everywhere. These pre-made slabs also used for runways, roads, and everything. Good idea is a good idea. And when I look around, I still don't see any deep craters in the forest between the buildings. We'll see what else we'll find. I have found my first bomb crater. Unless this is where the detonator building was. That has been removed, disassembled, blown up. But I don't know. There's also 2 ski buildings here. Well, certainly they're supposed to be. And here's an indent that's not cemented that has that angle. I hope they're not missing. There's a bit of a space. Some rubble over there with some broken up cement. Not liking that. So we have a 4-way cross here. Like all this destruction stuff going on here. But again, there are so many of them around. Whoa. Okay. Well, this is not a mole. So, alright, certainly this place was bombed. If ever there was a need of proof. That means that may have been one of the J buildings. That have been disassembled. That's not. Yeah. That certainly does look like it, doesn't it? And here's, what's this? Fairly straight. About 100 meters. Well, this could also have been a support building because the rubble doesn't really match. In fact, there's quite a lot of rubble here. Shrapnel damage to it, of course. This may not have been one of those buildings. These blocks are a lot larger than I would expect to see. Wow, this is actually fairly thick, although I don't see any rebar anywhere. What the hell was this? Almost looks like Hammond Goering's house. After a little digging, it has now been explained to me why there is no steel rebar here. There is no steel rebar in this building because this is the calibration house. It's one of the few buildings that would be this large, and that would account for why there's no metal around at all. They would calibrate the compass here, and whereafter they would roll the V1s on, and there, first then, assemble the wings, or attach the wings as it would be. I love how somebody put a little sign on that says danger. Where do you go? It's all rubble on the ground here. But I appreciate the warning, and I will practically ignore it. There's the center of the building down there, but there's no basement in these. there's there's nowhere to go in. Alright, that explains the rubble. But look at the forest floor between the buildings. It's remarkable how few craters I actually see. This looks like there's only a few dropped amongst the buildings so far. And of course every conceivable airplane was in use to bomb these sites. So big and small bombs would be used and continuously. But the firing never stopped until the sites were overrun by ground forces. Follow the path. I would have thought I would have gotten to the J buildings yet, unless they're completely demolished. I always find it hard to believe that they would be. But if calibration is back there, where would the rockets go? To the ramp. The ramp has to be close to here then. And just as I said, there's no signs of large bombs or munitions have been dropped here. I come across this doozy. Well, you're getting my first impressions here, so there you go. Go with it. We're discovering these together. But there's still not that many as I would have expected or have seen in other places. And it looks like the path has come to an end, along with my assertions that small munitions were used here. Here's a swimming pool of a crater. There's another one right there, which I guess have eaten the path away, giving me very little idea where to go now. So I'm going to circle the calibration house, since that would be one of the last stages before assembly and firing. But it just appears that there are a few things missing here. Holy crap. There's lots of very large craters here. Right. And small ones too, let's not discriminate. Alright, okay. Lots of large munitions, large craters. Large craters. I'll shut up now. And I think in the midst of all this destruction, I found a launch ramp. Overgrown, hiding here. Yep. Well, I thought this was the launch ramp, but it's not. I think this is a building wall, sloping building wall. It is, because this is the calibration house. Again, so the calibration house is here. Another large crater there. Then the ramp wouldn't be right here. Yes, this is not the ramp. So where is that then? So that's where the calibration house is. And that looks like a launch bunker. Fire control. That means the large storage units I haven't found yet. Everything should, theoretically, just follow the yellow brick road and I'll find what I'm looking for. Yeah, now we're getting somewhere. And it's still here, ready to fire in its place. What makes this one interesting is it has at least a low protective wall.
Nice that they constructed this. Give people an idea. It's interesting to see the low walls. They're not angled outwards from what I can see here. And the ramp is so easy. It should only take 5-7 days to assemble this, set it up, ready to fire. The actual metal ramp being the portable last key component. And if you build parallel walls like this and nothing else, that would make everybody analyzing the aerials scratch their head, wonder why there's two parallel walls. Except, of course, the groove in between is aiming at London. But this was a fairly simple ramp to put together. So now we don't even need to look for a sloping stone wall. We can just look for these. And thick the walls really are not. It looks like they're made in 3 layers of stones. Just barely enough to protect from shrapnel. And this part has been, well, hit by, this looks like there's a bomb crater right here. There is a bomb crater right here that took down that wall. But taking down that wall, and this wall, would not get in the way of firing. And here you see the mouth where the piston would shoot out and then be retrieved and cleaned and fired again. And from the rocket here, you would have the control bunker right there. Sounds like a single engine piston. Let's see what we're doing down here in the mud. There we are. This is pretty much it. Just a little command building where they could literally just flip the switch and get the thing in the air. Just a couple of dudes. That's all you really need here. You barely see it there. Not the thickest walls in the world. And a little staircase.
The foundation for the modern cruise missiles were laid right here, and had the war lasted just a little longer, it's very conceivable to think the Germans would have made mobile launchers they could launch the missiles straight from, and as guidance improved, as it did with the V2, targeting would become better. But these were cheap, they were very efficient, and if you look at the cost ratio, the damage ratio for the V1 and V2, the V1 actually comes out on top.
Here's a little path leading away from the firing ramp. And I'm interested because I've seen basically all the infrastructure except for the large storage buildings I would like to see for this site. So what more is here? And
Well, the road used to be cemented by the German roads, cracked up and now sort of paved in with smaller stones. So I'm not entirely sure what to expect here. I'm curious. Let's go see. I see something cemented looming at me some 100 meters there. Something happened here. Of course, I forgot there would also be the crew shelters would have been here. I actually think this has been turned into a museum and is therefore locked. Which it would be the crew shelter. Or what's left of it. That would be the shelter building for the crews. Food, cooking. Again, pre-stressed cement on brick.
The sites were identified both by aerial surveillance and human assets on the ground. The resistance infiltrated the work sites and the rail stations. So when the time was right, the large bunker sites were bombed with tall boy bombs. A lot of them. And the smaller sites were bombed with smaller bombers and ground attack aircraft. The large shelters had to be hit hard in the right place at the right time, and sometimes repeatedly to be put out of order, yet remained relatively intact. As it turned out, the smaller launch sites were the ones hardest to destroy, long term. In fact, Colonel Wachtel, who was in charge of the V-1 offensive, noted that after weeks of heavy bombing attacks, 17,000 tons of bombs dropped, he had lost 0 of his men, but 30 French laborers had been killed. And when the time came, there had been practically no obstruction to the launching of the V-1 attack, short of some confusion in the logistical chain having parts show up at the wrong launch sites. But this did not change his timetable of needing 10 days to launch the full offensive at 100%. And when finally given that time, he launched an amazing amount of flying bombs against London. During several months, 40% of all Allied air forces in the theater was dedicated to Operation Crossbow, and it generally did little to halt that rocket offensive. And more French workers were killed than German soldiers.
As if it's leaning over. I built in several rows of stones. Somewhat lost and forgotten here. One of the old V-1 firing ramps. There was a lot of these built. This was of a different design than just the rudimentary ramp setup for protection. Angled outwards. That's why the extra stone, just for support. Nothing's really missing here, it's all there. It looks more elaborate, but these walls simply were there to protect the launch ramp itself, which is a standard launch ramp. Of course, these would give away the location, because these would have to be built up, and that would take longer than just installing the ramp. The old road is still here to transport the V1s from calibration, from storage, fueling up to the ramp. And judging from the size of this might be the calibration house. I'm guessing it might be. There could be no metals in this house. If this is the one it is, this is where the compass would be calibrated before launch. It's kind of hard to see. There's very little left here. And it's built of a mixture of the red bricks and stones that the launch ramp protection walls are also built from. It is the calibration house. And given how many of these they launched, you can almost imagine how hectic activity
there was on this site after the command had been given and the operation begun. Not to mention the sporadic interruptions by the IRF, US Air Force, trying to stop them. This was destroyed. There's a lot more to this building than there's left here today. See the rubble sitting around here. But at least there's nothing metal, so I'm not going to find anything with a metal detector. And here next to the calibration house, I found reason to why it might have been separated in main parts. There's a very large crater right next to it. This was one of the sites that was heavily bombed. So the question is, was it before or after the operation had commenced? And when I say heavily bombed, I mean it. There's a lot of craters here. I wonder if any of the buildings are indeed intact. Could very well be the fuel bunker over there. This was the detonator building, where they would store the detonators for the V1s. Small building, 4 meters. And there should be a little staircase that, well, but this is pretty much what the building was. A little bit underground there. Detonator stored in the building there. There's very little reinforcement. And everything has been sort of rearranged. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not convinced this is that. I think it looks a little bit more massive. This could also be the pumping station for the water. There will be quite a bit of water needed to pump out the catapult, clean out. But of course it's a bat sanctuary now, obviously. But that's what it is. This is the pump station for the water reservoir. It's buried some meters into the ground. I'm sure I can find one that is open, you can see. This is one of the V1 storage buildings where they would store either the rockets themselves or the trolleys until they were needed. And there was not windows in them. That's a post-war cutout for post-war use. But you will note how thin the ceiling really is. And this is a straight building, unlike the curved ones I really want to see. It doesn't curve, but again, the windows, remember, are post-war. It's really interesting that the walls are thicker than the ceiling. This is a very thin, flimsy ceiling. This is a very thin, flimsy ceiling. But at least the windows and doors will give us light so we can see the building a little better. I think this was just for the trolleys. But the walls are rather thick, but they're not reinforced. This is not a thick bunker reinforced with rebar and cement. These are just light stones. And right here behind it is another bomb crater. It's hard to believe the building survived that at all.
There's damage to the end of the building, but a large aerial bomb to make that crater should have taken down the end of this building. It's not a reinforced building. That's amazing how that still stands. And up there, that direction is the launch ramp. There's something hiding in there. Again, bomb craters everywhere in the forest. This was regular bombing. 500-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs perhaps. Not tall boys. These were not the giant buildings, the giant constructions like the waterworks or the blockhouse that would need a heavy bomb load. These were smaller buildings that could be destroyed easier. Well, theoretically, because apparently they're all still standing. This one I have not seen before. And obviously it is partially flooded, because everything here is. I wonder what this is. This is not the thickness of the roof. The roof is maybe half of this. So not thick at all. Craters everywhere. It's like looking for something on a cheese. It's not really a bunker or a pillbox. It's, again, very crudely made. They made lots of these in preparation for the attack. There was a command bunker with an underground that was, well, not a command bunker, a personnel bunker with a little kitchen and for the crews. This is big enough that this could be such a bunker. And I'm sorry, I'm not swimming in there to find out if there's any kitchen stuff left. So we're just gonna mosey on to the next one. Sorry, didn't bring my dive gear out here. Oh, this looks like, but there are dirt mounds built up on all sides of this for protection. And then there's something here that looks like close defensive trenches. This is a small zigzag trench. It is. There's a trench system here. Small zigzag trench. For air shelters, I suppose, because close defensive, you're not going to be close defensive fighting from a V1 firing ramp site. If you're coming under direct fire, you're leaving, you're done. You did all you could do back home for beer and sauerkraut. And the trench is not surrounding the bunker, but it's interesting that it's here. This must be the crew bunker. Another crater here. They dropped a lot of ordnance on this thing, on this place in general. There's the first storage building. And here I'm guessing is the next, with the barrack building down to the left and the firing ramp up to the right. Let's see. This is one of these curved buildings I really wanted to see. But considering how many were built, I'm probably going to find one sooner or later. Well, wow, this is a lot longer. This is a J-shaped building. I also see it fairly bricked up. So I'd like to get into it, see if there are any rails or any overhangs left. But as we all know, the Europeans have developed an unhealthy, unnatural romance with bats, leaving them to brick up all buildings for bats to live in. Giving an indication here, with a bat on the door, they bricked it up all along the side. The building looks very intact. I don't think it had any battle damage. These J-shaped buildings stood out on the aerial photographs, and the British were wondering what they were, since they had this little bend to them. Not all of the V1 storage buildings had this, but some of them did, enough to raise an eyebrow. But now it houses bats, of course. Well, at least they left a little bit of it open so I can see. This is what the rest of the building would look like inside. There would be the little roadways for the trolley where the V1s would be transported. I do see some cement and the ceiling here, some rebar. So, I mean, it's not a thick roof though. It is really not a thick roof. I always did wonder why they made them J-shaped. I remember there was a reason. Just for the life of me, I can't remember what it was. But this storage building was, as I thought, just for the dollies, or the trolleys that would move the V1s into position, with their storage bunker behind me. And then this could be for various fueling. This is 20, 30 meters long, the space where the V1s would be unloaded by a crane, put on their trolleys to their respective buildings. They would be delivered and loaded without the warhead and of course detonators attached. So this would very likely be a support building, and possibly the crane would be, that would be its footing, possibly. Of course it's locked off due to excessive bat use. This was the workshop building. Here they would install most of the parts except the wings, and from here the V1 would roll on to calibration, compass calibration, and only after that would be done was the wings installed. But these are very crude, very rudimentary buildings that are here closed off and empty, except for bats. So this is the steam generation building. One of the interesting things is after each fire, remember the launch ramp would fuel the piston with hydrogen peroxide and potassium permanganate. That would be the reaction that would fling the V1 off the ramp. Thereafter, the whole chamber, the whole ramp would have to be steam cleaned with somewhat a chemical steam with a little bit of lime in it, because they would have to clean out all the chemical residue from the launch ramp before the next launch, before they would pour in everything again. And this would generate the steam for that particular endeavor. Also here to my left,
There was once a small building in here that would store the chemicals. That building no longer exists, and it's very likely it was destroyed due to a bomb impact. I'm still, again, a little bit impressed that these buildings still stand after having been bombed as severely as they were. This building was divided up in 3 separate rooms. By the way, all these V1 launch sites basically have the same components. There's also be a water reservoir, which is no longer in existence, and a launch bunker, which I honestly think have sunken into the ground. I always thought there was a crane hanging there launching, but there's not. Although one can't exactly say they're in good shape. And it would launch this direction, towards England and London. And from the looks of it, I see hooks for camouflage netting on the protective wall here. And somewhere in this area, down here, there used to be a little control bunker, a little platform here. Those are also gone. Stand here and imagine the noise that would have happened here and the activity when rockets were fired from here, or when the RAF and the Americans bombed the site, which they most certainly did, and quite well too. Although I am very surprised that despite the heavy bombing that's evident from all the craters, most of the buildings are still standing and intact. But all over Normandy, over this part of France, there's defensive bunkers, firing ramps, and larger things as well. Much, much larger things. Here hidden away is what is mentioned as another V1 launch site. Which is interesting because I haven't seen one, a long storage building with a double door. I thought this was a storage bunker for before delivery to the actual launch sites. Let's have a look at this, see what we can find here. Not much to look at. I guess it's a nice barn for the farmer, but not a very long building. Not a very large building. It's really a walkway here. And of course it's full of tires. I guess it doesn't get much more World War II than V1 launch sites, but I had somehow very cheap and rudimentarily built. Pre-stressed cement roof, and that's it. I'm gonna go have a look around. The area, see if I can find any infrastructure to it. I can't find any launch sites or any infrastructure left survived this. See if I can find some more history about it, but that's the only remains there's left here. And 15 minutes away is a very small Versorgungsbunker.
which I had thought was one of the storage bunkers as well. Certainly it's not. This is much smaller, just a little support building. This could even be a vehicle support shelter. It would make a nifty little summer house at this point, I'll be honest. I took one round to it. Some of the roof beams are still fairly rudimentary, not reinforced at all. At best, a little support building. Not bomb-proof. Not even tank-proof, really. And it is identical. This has all the feels of a small vehicle shelter. You couldn't even hide one V1 in here. So, a support building for the V1 program.
The conceptual design of the V1 dates back to the 1915s. Initially thought out as a remote-controlled target drone, and in 1935 Paul Schmidt and Professor Georg Hans Madlunger submitted a design to the Luftwaffe for a flying bomb. It was an innovative design that used a pulse jet engine. Fritz Kassler developed remote-controlled target drones, the FCG-3 Flakzielgerät 43, and in October 1939, Argus, working with the Arado Flugzeugwerke, proposed a fanfoil, a remote-controlled aircraft carrying a payload of 1 ton that could return to base after releasing its bomb. However, once again, the Luftwaffe had declined to award a development contract. In 1940, Schmidt and Argus began cooperating, integrating Schmidt's shutter system with the Argus atomized fuel injection. Tests began in January 1941, and the first flight was made on 30 April 1941 with the Goethe Q-143. On February 27, 1942, Kassler sketched out the design of an aircraft with a pulse jet above the tail, the basis for the future V-1. As we can see, just like today, a lot of weapon developments were initially carried by civilian firms or military contractors. A preliminary design of the V-1 was produced in 1942 April, the P-35, using gyroscopes, and when submitted to the Luftwaffe on 5 June 1942, the specifications included a range of 299 kilometers, a speed of over 700 kilometers, and capable of delivering a 500-kilogram warhead. The project Freisler F1-103 was approved on 19 June of that year and assigned the code name Kirschkern. The delivery method was thus defined. It was simple, cheap, and easy to handle. Next was the best way of deploying and launching the V-1, and within range of London and other major British cities. The first V-1 had been launched from an aircraft, with the fuselage constructed mainly of welded steel, sheet metal and wings built of plywood. The simple arc is built. Pulse jet engines pulse 50 times per second, and the launch ramps could be built fast and cheaply as well. They were 49 meters long and in 8 sections, upon which the V-1 was launched off the ramp, which was named after its designer, Helmut Walter, and would be the base of all different V-1 launch sites. It would be launched off a simple ramp launched by use of a catapult seated under the rocket. The steam pressure was generated by a small amount of tea and set stuff, using this volatile reaction when the two would mix, and thus propel the piston forward at 320 kilometers an hour and way above the V-1's minimum stall speed of 240, which is still quite high. Now, it is a common misconception that this was done to allow the engine to start running, but this is not true. It was done because the Argus did not have enough power to propel the V-1 to a speed over its stall speed on its own. On October 3rd, 1942, the fourth A4, tested, flew flawlessly, left the Earth's atmosphere for the first time, and landed 118 miles away, within 4,000 yards of its target. On Christmas Eve, 1942, first V-1 flew 900 meters for about a minute after a ground launch. On 26 May 1943, Germany decided to put both the V-1 and V-2 into production, customary to German practices. Let's do everything. In July 1943, the V-1 flew 245 kilometers and impacted within a kilometer of its target. Yet, it would be almost 9 months before Hitler saw the film of the successful launch of the A4 and approved Peenemünde an unlimited budget and put Dornberger in complete control of the rocket program. For now, anyway. While Göring, not particularly enthusiastic, did not approve finally the launch ramps until 1943. It is noteworthy to mention that both rockets had been put in production before their designs were completed, leading to many changes and further delays and misfires. And the V-1 program did not enjoy anywhere near the amount of money and support the V-2 did. One reason was the man in charge of determining how many workers and materials, Karl Otto Sauer, did not release these unless the program was moved in under his control, in a bit of gambling. And here we see the beginning of how solid concept of the Reich was delayed and sabotaged by constant German infighting. On January 15th, Albert Speer appointed Gerhard Degenkolb to head up the ministry's Special A4 Committee, tasked with finding the necessary component production capacity in wildly dispersed locations, and to establish assembly plants for the rockets. Degenkolb was ruthless and driven, and had proven himself to Hitler with his massive locomotive construction program, and he fast-tracked the rocket production in spite of Dornberger's dislike of him. The Luftwaffe's approach, however, was opposite that of the armies, yet their small, inexpensive flying bombs was somewhat seen as a threat to the hugely expensive and complex rocket of the army. It was indeed the simplest method of attacking targets at long distances. Yet von Braun would write reports countering the V-1 suggestion in the program's cancellation, and infighting continued to slow down what could have been greater cooperation and sped up implementation. Still, the war went on, and locations and designs for launching platforms and bunkers had been scouted, especially in Normandy, from where they could reach London, and the Channel ports from where a possible invasion fleet might be assembled. For both weapon systems, two completely and different approaches were developed and produced. Hermann Göring and Erhard Milch had from the outset begun to design huge, enormous reinforced bunkers to house and fire the V-1s and V-2s respectively. Speer, knowing how Hitler relished the thought of huge masses of steel and concrete bunkers, had proposed to him a large reinforced bunker for this purpose. General Walter Axelm, CNC of German Air Artillery, had pointed out all such large structures would be bombed immediately before construction was even finished, as they would be spotted from the air. He thus suggested smaller launching facilities, mobile launchers, and ramps. So true to German tradition, once again, both methods were adopted for both weapons. But Hitler did make a note that the large bunkers, if failing to support the rockets, should be able to be converted for large troop shelters, although he was somewhat optimistic that with enough protection for the larger sites or greater dispersal of the smaller ones, they would be difficult to destroy. And he was partially correct in this. Huge bunkers, codenamed waterworks, such as the one in Ciencourt and the quaint little French village, was designed for V-1 assembly and launching. The Wasserwerk bunkers measured 250 meters long. But these never became the tip of the spear. The small mobile launchers did. However, in truth, an A4 could be set up fast on any flat surface. Basically, a flat concrete slab would do. It could be, and had been done, quickly before being spotted by Allied air forces, and before the lines froze up from the liquid oxygen. Yet it was only in autumn 1943 that reliable reports had begun to reach London that German scientists had begun to seriously work on long-range heavy-lift rockets. The reports were full of speculation, and none of them had actually made any attempt to analyze the rocket propulsion. However, enough information suggested time to inform the Prime Minister of the possibilities of a rocket attack in the near future. The British response to the possible threat was extremely convoluted and bungled by infighting, and challenges to positions amongst those analyzing the German rocket program. And also, as it has falsely been reported since D-Day, landings had been in danger of having been cancelled had the German rocket firing locations not been destroyed. Later reports clearly show the danger to the invasion force was accepted as quite small, as it was noted in one of the Operation Crossbow reports, the British wartime report attempting to determine what the German rocket sites were, what needed to be done about them, except, of course, to bomb them. And here's another launch ramp. Calibration building in good shape. And I'm not sure. Here in this dirt mound, I believe, was one of the J-shaped buildings. And a little further away from that is another sport building for the trolleys. It's a little hard to see what happened here, but I am now officially curious because I see a staircase down. Or in and around. Well, there's not much down. There's a tree here. Don't know what this is all about. I'm curious. I haven't seen one of these in one location before. There is the down. Very flooded down. So this is not one of the V-shaped buildings. Well, this is interesting. I wonder if there was a larger control bunker. Huh. This is new. I'm sorry I can't go in there because, as you can clearly tell, it is flooded. And I have no idea how deep this goes. I can't see the bottom at all. Interesting. So a protected wall, staircase down, into a little bunker here. So they are with a bunch of shrapnel on it. So these are also apparently ever so slightly different. That's interesting. Interesting things. Let's face it. Over elaborate, complicated things. Standardization. Well, there's a tree in here. With a tall door, this could be. Oh, it could be the waterworks building. But this little underground bunker is very interesting to me. And obviously, a lot of the property that these were on have been
put back to use to the farming community and the farmers here. Well, that thing certainly took a hit. Cracked. Could be wouldn't be the did take some shrapnel here as well. We are way out on the peninsula. I would imagine all of this would have been camouflaged, of course. This is a technical building. I suppose it could be the building that would have housed. Well, this is all there is. Could it be the chemical store or the compressor building? To me, this looks like a generator building, looks like a technical building, something with, I could see this being to create steam or electricity. There were these technical buildings. You would need to clean the catapults after use, and you would need hot air, hot water. You would need hot steam to clean the catapults after, with a little bit of lime in it to clear out all the chemicals, set stuff, and end stuff. This could be it. Oh, I got planes. Like, I'm thinking over there is a groove that looks like it could have been a storage building. Very hard to tell at this point. There's a few more structures on various private properties here in the neighborhood, but the calibration building looks very large and generally intact. I wanted to see that. And it's nice that the farmer here left the gate open so you can actually come in and have a look. You don't have to jump fences again. And this is the original road leading to it. And straight from the calibration bunker to the launch ramp. I guess we should call it a calibration house. It's not really a bunker, is it? But it's in very good shape. It is the largest of the calibration houses.
The V1 was directed and guided by a gyro stabilizer connected to a compass. This had to be calibrated. This was done here in the calibration house, where there was absolutely no metals present to disturb the settings of the compass.
This is very nice. It's rather large. Corrugated metal. The roof up there, of course, is new, because there wouldn't be any metal in this at all at the time, as that would have disrupted the compass calibration. So you could wheel the V1 in here without wings. It will be suspended here, where lots of damage. This almost looks like direct fire more than shrapnel. It does look very much like direct fire. If one bomb would have done this, there would have been a crater or something here where I'm standing, and there's not. So I'm gonna go with direct fire on this. and wooden roof. This is by and large the most intact calibration house I've seen. Even if ever so slightly blown up, but it's a little bombing amongst friends. And a large square here, leading down to the firing platform that is partially covered here by tires, so we know it's through the period. For those of you guys who are not entirely clued in on the joke for World War II locations and tires, years and years and years ago, that phrase was coined in some of my earlier documentaries, where I noted that in every underground bunker or UV location or underground factory, everywhere I went, there was always a stack of tires, or at least one or two. So by definition, if there's a tire on it, it's World War II. Alright, farmers are using that end, but this is the part where the V1 would be parked. The ramp is behind that. And here is the little fire control bunker, which is very interesting because here is the fire control bunker and its observation port. This is what they can observe: a protective wall. They will not actually be able to see the V1 from the fire control bunker. That seems very poorly planned out, but it's intact, and they filled it up a little bit, but still there. Basically, the bunker is just as tall as the protective wall, which means you can't see anything, unless maybe, nope, there's no observation point here. So the fire control bunker can see a wall. That gives me the idea that the protective wall was put in place after the original design bunker was built. Otherwise it would seem, I know the Germans did some rather illogical things at times, but not that dumb. And the wall looks in really good shape. In fact, this whole structure seems well intact. Yeah, angles all in place. Very nice. They should clean it up, stick a little one in here, and just a very large, nice, productive. Why would you have such large walls here unless they're bracers for support? It's not like you're actually breaking up a muscle flash. And here are the cement mounts where the rail would be. Yeah, this certainly the facility has been bombed, but this ramp has not been hit. It's all in good shape. And hooks of camouflage netting on top. Yeah, this is in good shape. At least they would protect against shrapnel. I do have another theory. It's just a theory I'm working on. This is the original protective wall that runs all the way down to alongside and fences in the right side of the catapult. And this, and I'm just throwing it out there, could... No, my theory is done. I was gonna say this could have been built by farmers later just to fence this in, but not that damn elaborate. There's no reason for that. This is double thick and splits up and wraps around the command post. You're not gonna do that just for the sake of farming. So this was an original wall blocking the observation bunker. Now protecting tires. Very interesting lifestyle choice there. Right.
Both the V2 and V1 program cost collectively an enormous amount of resources and money, all at a time where everything was needed. So I always wondered why the Germans would expel such a vast resource amount in order to deliver a 500 kilogram or 1 ton warhead into a general location, unless there were plans to marry a new type of warhead to the rockets, or larger rockets. For this, we need to look deeper into the German nuclear program. And with that, I'm not talking about the much talked about Heisenberg program, which was noted for having failed. I am talking about the other 10 programs.
My name is Tino Struckmann. I run Lost Battlefields. Every year, I travel around the world to try to bring you to all the most interesting historical military locations from modern wars and the World War II special projects, battlefields, forts, fortresses, and tunnels, everything else. Things you may not be able to see or go to yourselves. Please join me on Patreon or join Lost Battlefields through the website so you get access to all my files and my notes. It really does help, and like, follow, share here on the channel if you can. That helps too.